Okay, so thank you to everyone that's joined. For probably everyone's benefit, I should just introduce myself. We'll then do a quick whistle around some of the other relevant officers, stroke councillors present. And then I think we've got a brief presentation that we just want to take you through in relation to this scheme. And then we'll move obviously to have engagement from those of you that are on this call. So my name's Councillor Alexander Amon. I'm the chair of the Transport and Air Quality Committee. I've been told in my orders before this meeting to let you all know that for the purposes of this meeting, we're recording it as a record of what takes place here. So if you have any issue with your video or your or audio recording being available to all, then I suggest you switch it off. But that's what we're doing. So I've introduced myself. We've got a number of councillors present. I don't know whether perhaps first, if we just go with Councillor Mansfield, I can see is here. We're not, forgive the delay,
Apologies.
We're not all empowered to unmute ourselves. So
yeah, so I'm Councillor Mansfield. I'm one of the South Twickenham councillors, so representing the western part of Clifton Road, and wanted to hear what residents thought so we can make sure we represent you fairly. I also am Vice Chair of the Transport and Air Quality Committee, supporting Councillor Amon.
Thank you. I don't know whether we've got any of Councillor Mansfield's fellow councillors for Twickenham South on the call. Is Councillor Butlin or Councillor Bennett present?
Yes, I'm Councillor Michael Butlin, and I'm from South Twickenham, and effectively for the area we're talking about is everything from Clifton Road west. In other words, Richard Reynolds is actually in South Twickenham ward. The Twickenham Riverside is the other side of the street if you're actually at the station. So you've got effectively two wards. We're the left-hand ward, and Twickenham Riverside are the right-hand ward if you're looking at it from the south.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Butlin. Informative geography lesson, or political geography lesson as well. And Councillor Bennett, are you here?
I don't think he is.
No, okay. And then we've got the other ward, as Councillor Butlin just alluded to, of Twickenham Riverside, which takes in the sort of other bit. And that I don't know whether we've got Councillor Crouch is here.
No, just Councillor Chard.
Councillor Chard. Well, perhaps Councillor Chard will just briefly want to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Councillor Chard, one of the Riverside councillors. I should say that the other two Riverside councillors are at an important sort of planning briefing this afternoon, and Councillor Bennett, I believe, is a Finance Committee emergency meeting. So I'm sure they would have liked to have come, but are unable to. And Councillor Butlin has already explained the geography better than I could. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you, James. So, and then we have, I think, two officers of note on the call. We've got David Tidley, perhaps first, and then Lindy Lowe.
Hello, everybody. David Tidley, the Transport Strategy Team Manager for Richmond Council.
And Lindy Lowe, School Travel Advisor for Richmond Council and leading on the School Street programme.
Okay, so that will sort of concludes the necessary sort of hygiene of introductions. Lindy, we have a presentation that we wanted to show. Are you going to sort of hold the circle on navigating it, or do you want to make any remarks on it, or would you like me to guide people through that?
Effie's going to present her screen and I'll run through the presentation, and then if you want to take the questions afterwards, that would be wonderful. Thanks.
Fine. That great.
I'm actually just going to also turn my camera off because I have Wi-Fi issues at this time of the evening, so forgive me for that.
All right. If we lose you, Lindy, then I'll be improvising on your behalf.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
There's a motivation, right, if nothing else.
Okay. So just wanted to, if you want to switch over to the next slide and possibly the one after as well, because it's just really a quick recap of the history of what's happened in the area. So the very first sort of talk about any changes to the area was a proposal from our engineers, which proposed a one-way down Station Road westbound along Station Road, reducing the eastbound traffic to London Road. This didn't actually go to consultation because there were concerns over the potential impact on Clifton Road and the school frontage. As you'll see there, the no entry sign is at Clifton Road proposed on the scheme. If you want to change to the next slide, please.
I should say, before you carry on that, Lindy, just by way of context, this is very much driven by a sort of government and London agenda for us to take action in light of COVID to try and reduce reliance on vehicles and improve pedestrian and cycling amenity, wasn't it?
Yes, although I'm not aware of the engineering, I've sort of stepped in afterwards when it came to the school street side of things, yeah. And then we've got a slide which shows the school street trial in its current form as it is today on site. This also represents the proposal for ANPR, so the cameras will be at the same points where the entry zones are at currently on site, being the sort of Holly Road, Copthall Gardens, Heath Road, Clifton Road, Grove Avenue, Lion Road, and Station Road, Sherland Road junctions. If you want to move on to the next one. Okay, so at the last community conversations, we also showed an option which was to remove Clifton and Copthall Gardens from that loop from the school street, so showing a much shorter zone as shown in the grey on that slide. General views from the residents that were present were that this would be detrimental to them, given that there would probably be a lot more cars, parents, carers dropping the children off using the loop for those purposes. Effie, if you want to next one, thanks. And in light of the recent letter that went out with regards to the ANPR, concerns from residents were raised regarding inconvenience of the ANPR on visitors and deliveries, which led us to consider another option, and that would be to perhaps reduce the ANPR area of the zone to the grey zone, and then include the Copthall Clifton loop as a signage only scheme, so without the camera enforcement, which would obviously omit the need to register delivery vehicles and visitors. Next slide, please. So just to quickly recap on some of the data that I did go through at the last meeting, but I'm aware not everyone might have been in attendance. So we've seen quite drastic figures in terms of the traffic monitoring that we've done and in terms of the data that's been collected from the marshals. So Grove Road has seen a reduction of from around 100 to around 10 cars. That's in each session. So each 1.5 hour session would be 10 cars roughly. These are obviously averages. Clifton Road reducing from about 120 to around 30. Copthall Gardens from around 100 to maybe 12 or so. And Station Road from about 200 to around 40. So we've seen a significant reduction in car travel. Monitoring will again be undertaken in the next term. That'll be to understand the longer term impacts of the scheme. So we'll have traffic counts again, and that will hopefully, if there is ANPR in place, we will be monitoring the impacts of that as well. Next slide, please. And just some feedback from residents to date on the ANP proposal. So in terms of positives, people have said that it improves road safety, it keeps the area outside of the school gates free of congestion, it reduces idling vehicles and hopefully improves air quality, encourages walking and cycling to school, aids social distancing, creates a more pleasant and calm atmosphere in the road, and residents have also raised that the point that if barriers or enforcement were to be removed, there would obviously be a return of cars at the school peak times. Next slide, please. So concerns about the ANPR are deliveries, couriers and tradesmen, as well as private hire taxis, which would need an exemption. This is an inconvenience for residents because of the need to apply for these exemptions and for their visitors to apply. There are concerns over the use of cameras and the fines. There is information on our website with regards to the PCNs. And also, what was also raised was an inconvenience for parents who are reliant on driving to and from school. If you can turn to the next slide, thanks. So in response to that, we have made a few amendments. So the council has proposed a go live date of the 15th of March, and we've obviously paused that now. So wait to hear what the residents would prefer. We have now continued the marshalling up until the end of the school term, which I believe is the 26th of March. The operation of the hours of the school street are 7:45 to 9:15 and 2 till 3:30 as per the signage on street. Originally, we were allowing up to 2 cars per household, but now we have increased that to 4. And if anyone does need more, they can email me on the school street mailbox, which I'll be giving at the end. We have created an allowance for deliveries and visitors under on the forms, so that can be made. We are also informing delivery companies of the school street. And in light of the recent school closures, we are extending the consultation period to the 30th of June, which will allow us to monitor further. Next slide, please, Effie. So this is the current enforcement that we have in place, or proposed enforcement that we have in place. So we have proposed a grace period before PCNs will be issued. That will be a 0 monetary value grace period with just a warning notice, just reminding residents or businesses to register their exemption or not to travel in the zone if they're not exempt. Cars entering without an exemption can still register on that exemption day, or they can email the school street mailbox if it's past that day. The following cars are considered, or vehicles are considered exempt or valid for exemption, and those are blue badge holders, emergency vehicles, healthcare workers, we have council waste trucks, postal service, statutory undertakers, emergency works. We have obviously school buses and school transport, taxis, and also South West Trains and their contractors would need to access the railway line. Residents and business obviously included as well. Temporary and short-term vehicles are included in those exemptions. So if residents have a hire car or if they have a long-term visitor that needs access to the site, the ability to register a new vehicle and remove an old one is available on the forms. And there's also the other option, which will allow you to register any unusual situations, deliveries, or one-off ad hoc visitors. Next slide, please, Effie. And these are just some contacts. So that's the school street mailbox. If you wanted to screenshot or just jot that down, you can email that for any queries that you might have with regards to the school street or the AMPR. And then, as I said, our consultation is still running until the 30th of June. So that is the consultation link, but you can also just Google Richmond consultations and it will appear on the list of current consultations. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll hand you back to Councillor Amon.
Thank you, Lindy. So the way that I suggest we proceed here is I just want to make a very brief sort of remark about the recent correspondence to me and to sort of summarize where I think the lion's share of that is directed, though of course there will be other views and we want to hear those and embellishments to that. But I think that broadly speaking, what I've heard through the correspondence that has ensued since our proposed move to AMPR technology has become more imminent, is that there were roughly 2 groupings of concerns. There are others, but 2 major groupings of concerns. The first would be about deliveries and regular visits, which I think we can talk to a little bit further about what our sort of mitigations for those are. And the second, I think, was a general concern. I think about access has been movements relating to residents via own vehicles. I think has been largely resolved by the offering of exemptions for those vehicles, but deliveries and other miscellaneous visits, I think, has raised a quite legitimate question about whether or not the exemption system on a kind of day-by-day basis will work well for many people. And to that extent, one of the things we're exploring is whether or not we can offer a sort of longer term exemption for regular visitors or for providers of services like carers and so on, that mean that it doesn't have to be completed on a sort of day visit basis. there's a related issue about how the plethora of deliveries and normal activities work. And in truth, we're going to have to, with any scheme, we're going to have to see how those matters settle. We as the council will do whatever we can, and hearing further feedback from this meeting about trying to make sure the design of any system is as helpful and responsive as it can be. But part of the mitigation here will be about some of those deliveries and visits being made to roads that are outside the zone. And that won't all be instant and won't all be perfect on day one. I'm absolutely certain about that. And I've been candid in previous meetings and correspondence with residents that I can't guarantee that, because I don't expect that to happen. But I do believe, as experience tells me from various other schemes, that these things do find a way and settle into a more sustained pattern of behaviour, which you can then judge whether or not that pattern of behaviour is sustainable. And that may be a combination of delivery companies and others adjusting their patterns. The fact that anxieties about the impact of these measures may not be as pronounced in truth on the impacts of these various services as people envisage, and by the council making changes to our own processes to support residents. What I think Lindy has very ably presented here is the kind of how we've gotten to where we are, how we were at the juncture point where we were, because we've taken guidance through a meeting like this about how to proceed with the ANPR, and had taken the view, without, I think, dissent from residents, that the scheme's extent should be that which it was anticipated to be. What we're saying now is, of course, if that view has adjusted, we're very happy to hear that, and we can pivot in that regard if needs be. But there are pros and cons to changing the overall area concerned. The last thing I'd just say is that I totally appreciate that that there would be a range of views on this, and that there are pros and cons for individuals living on the streets. The thing I would just say, beyond the overall feedback you provide this evening, is that, of course, this council has an obligation to you as residents, but it also has an obligation to the parents and children and staff coming to and from the school. And the school has the streets around the school have clearly, from the evidence presented by Lindy, have improved. The conditions around the school have improved from a safety and certainly from a traffic volume point of view. And that's of value in itself, but of course has to be seen against the context of the impacts that has on residents. Now, positive and negative, of course, because the reduction of traffic, air pollution, bad parking and driving behaviours is, of course, positive, I'm sure, for many of you. But there are pieces of grit within this system that either we want to resolve or understand your views on. So, given the macro point about the extent of the scheme, I'm interested in views. The way that I think it's best that we do this is, I think some people have already entered into writing slightly lengthy questions here on the actual chat forum. That's not going to enable us to get through as much as we can this evening. So I think what's best is if people can just say question, I'll try and call you, we'll take your intervention, and we'll do our very best to respond to it with our thoughts. I just want to start with the first comment that's made that was relatively brief here, which is from Sanjeet Magera. Are we able to hear from Sanjeet?
Hi there. It wasn't letting me unmute before. Yes. Hi. Thanks very much. Yeah, my sort of concern really is ANPR twofold. Really, one is sort of basic concerns around invasion of privacy. I think it's just a little weird that a camera is always sort of pointing at us and potentially recording information. So I know people will have varying views on that. My view is I'd prefer not to be the case. On the flip side, I actually don't mind the presence of human beings, marshals. And I appreciate there's a cost concern there, but in some respects, I prefer that there's sort of a level of discretion there. They get to know you, and it almost makes the street feel a bit safer too. So right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll pause there.
Well, let me address that. So let's start with the stewards. That simply isn't a sustainable model. So the original streets that we've deployed around this borough, and more typically are replicated, are relatively small single street interventions. Size of this school, the number of streets involved, the volumes of traffic around it are different. And so the marshaled system that we've provided for is very much a temporary measure. This council can't afford to sustain on a paid basis the marshalling required. We have asked the school at the outset, and indeed we asked residents whether they'd like to sort of come together to try and marshal a system themselves. And to date, that hasn't been something that has elicited a kind of community response. So as far as we can see as a council, in order to preserve the positive benefits of reduced traffic through these streets at those peak times, the only way that we can do so is through the administration of an ANPR system. Now, as you say, on ANPR, people will have different views. All I just simply say is this council have absolutely no interest in using the ANPR camera for anything else other than ensuring that vehicles that shouldn't be in the school street system are penalised for doing so where they do. It's not viewed by human beings for other purposes. And as I pointed out to some residents who've corresponded with me, there's plenty of camera technology in and around your roads, indeed in your houses, on your doorbells, that is as invasive, probably more so than ANPR technology. So I appreciate there are a range of views on that, but I can say as the responsible party on part of the council, there's no intent whatsoever to be snooping on residents. The only purpose of this technology is as a data recognition one for vehicles, to make sure that those that have not got an exemption or a reason for being within the road system are penalised for doing so they don't return, and that we manage to keep the traffic volumes at the levels that they presently have been reduced to. I've got some, I'm going to sort of skip forward because I want to get to this sort of questions forum. But someone's asked us to define ANPR. That stands for automatic number plate recognition. So these cameras' sole purpose is to recognize and record a number plate and to therefore run it against a database and ensure that it's either allowed to be there or not. And that's why the whitelist that we've asked residents to put their vehicles registrations against will be one of the databases it's checked against to say, well, that vehicle is exempt, it won't get a ticket issued to it. Donald Hodgson, do you want to say something? Because I know you've been a frequent correspondence on this, and I've got you at least twice in this chat.
Yeah, the ANPR cameras, are they always going to be on? Because they do digitize the number plate and they also take a photograph. So are they 24/7?
Yeah, David, do you want to say anything on that? Do you know from a technical point of view whether they're always on?
Just unmute myself, sorry. They will always be on insofar as they would be powered, but they wouldn't be operationally working during the non-operational hours.
So they're still recording the whole time.
No, I think we would set them so that they're only recording and only enforcing during the hours of operation.
And how
there would be no benefit. There'd be no benefit to us as a council from running them unless there were no means of switching them off.
Yeah.
I don't.
They're not intended just to be clear, Mr. Sargent. They're not intended to be CCTV cameras or provide a general purpose camera, function for the council.
I still find them an invasion of my privacy that I'm recording.
Well, I understand that,
and I don't.
You've made that clear.
We can do this maybe off this call, but you need to qualify exactly how they work, because if they're powered up, they're recording.
But okay. At the risk, very happy to do that offline. But as I think I corresponded with you, Mr. Hodgson, there are cameras all around this borough on many of its roads, which nobody seems to have any concern about at all.
Councillor, I can also perhaps just add that there are electronic screens on the camera, so they're not viewing any properties. They're trained only on the carriageway.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's also a useful clarification. Julia Friedel, I've got next.
Hello. Yes, we were just wondering, considering the school has children as young as 4 years old, they don't seem to have any, travel strategy in place of how for parents to drop them off. Would it not be a solution for the school to basically build something on their grounds, like a drop-off, location, to basically lighten the load on all the roads surrounding it?
I've got to say instinctively no, because I think space is at such a premium on the site, on any of our school sites. And secondly, I think it's understandable approach, but it causes largely the same issues, because it will incentivize car use to drop off children into the school, which will force vehicle movements into your surrounding road network area. And any facility would never be large enough. So you'd always have vehicles that wouldn't be able to get into whatever the car parking facility was, and therefore need to substitute. So I think the idea around this is, around this scheme, is to ensure that wherever possible, parents are also encouraged not to come by car. They're encouraged to take public transport, to walk and to cycle. And certainly my personal observations of the roads around the school have been that with these measures in place, we have seen significant improvement in those behaviours, and we'd hope to build on that.
So the assumption is that the parents are going to actually drop the kids by car less.
Well, that is what's been happening. That is what's been happening with the barriered system, because they haven't been able to bring their kids right to the doorstep of the school. At the very least, they've had to bring car where necessary to an outer area and walk or cycle the remaining distance. But I think many parents clearly are deciding that, given that they've got to do that distance by foot or by bicycle, there's a much greater incentive to do the entirety where possible in the same. So I've certainly noticed an increase in those modes of transport. And I think the risk is, if you build car parks for people, they're going to use cars, in truth. Duncan, you had a question about whether the problem we're fixing here existed before the school was significantly extended. I'm not going to take that, I've got to be honest, because one of the things I want to avoid with this conversation is a kind of, rabbit hole where we talk about what should and could have been done in relation to the school. I wasn't a councillor, I wasn't part of the administration when decisions were taken about the school, its expansion, or indeed, I as a councillor don't have any control over its admissions policy. So what I can talk about is the transport-related elements here. I can perfectly understand there'll be a range of views about the school, its history, its relationship with the community, but I'm really not in a position to resolve those, because they are history. Julie Cortis, you've got a question.
Hi, yeah, I understand. I've been looking at other schemes in other boroughs, and I've found that at some point there has to be an equalities impact assessment, which looks at all the protected characteristics under the Equalities Act. And obviously we've been in conversation about the particular needs of our family, but we have in our road elderly residents and residents in the halfway house, Mendip House, that we don't know what their needs are, and I'm not necessarily believe that they'll be coming forward to tell you what they are. So I just wondered what the process is going to be for making sure those vulnerable residents don't get disproportionately disadvantaged.
Well, officers may want to offer a sort of process point response there, but what I would simply say is that as Lindy outlined, we already have set out a range of dispensations which are available, which mean that, as far as I can tell at this stage, we're trying, and we can improve this if it needs to be improved. The types of services and accessibility required wouldn't be adversely hindered. The other point to make is that with the disabled or other vulnerable groups, actually the impacts of poor driving behaviours, parking and air quality are disproportionately laden on those groups too. They're often the people that suffer the most from those. And so by improving the road environment around here, making it a less hostile road environment and improving the air quality around it, that also has benefits to those same groups too. But David, Linda, do you want to say anything specifically on the process point of what we would need to do around this scheme, or what we indeed have done?
I would just add to what you've already said, Councillor, that when we originally identified the school streets, we did sort of spell out the sort of, how they might operate and how they could operate. And as you say, there's a range of exemptions in place which generally cover disabled people, care workers, and those providing assistance. As the scheme is also an experimental scheme, then there is a sort of a built-in system within it to ensure that as we review and as we move forward, we can continue to refine any of it in order to address those concerns. And if they, I mean, the caller referred to being in contact with us. So by all means, continue to do that, because we'll try and help wherever we can, and to ensure that it runs smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, what you can take, as I've said at previous meetings and in much of the correspondence I've returned, is this council really does want to try and make this scheme as user-friendly, helpful, working with the grain as is humanly possible. There are technological and process constraints on doing that at times. I mean, I think I read a comment earlier about, could we not sort of automatically allow delivery vehicles to be exempt? Well, I mean, again, face value sounds like a great idea, right? If it's got an Amazon liveried van, why not just let it through? Well, the problem is not all Amazon deliveries are in Amazon liveried vans. And secondly, not every Amazon liveried van is necessarily delivering to the roads concerned, rather than using it as a rat run. So, sophisticated responses are sometimes needed to things that seem pretty straightforward, but they often aren't quite as easy a nut to crack. What you can take from me is that as a council, we are committed to trying to crack those nuts, rather than just sort of say, well, tough. That's not the approach we're taking here. Hence this meeting, hence the dialogue, hence the engagement. A question, I think, well, Julia Friedel, we had one from you earlier, but you're asking about secondary cameras mounted beneath the ANPR cameras. David, Lindy, have you got any? I mean, unless Julia, you've got anything to add to that?
Yes, basically, we were walking around having a look at the cameras, and we noticed that beneath every ANPR camera, there's a new other camera that showed up, and we were wondering what that's for, basically. Yeah,
David, are you technologically savvy enough to read a comment?
No, I don't know what that is. Whether it's a camera or it might simply be something that's helping to power the camera. It might just be part of the wider technology, but we'll have to check that one out.
There is certainly nothing that's been installed that is unrelated to the ANPR technology, but we can clarify what the element you're referring to actually its purpose is. But I can tell you there's no sort of second order installation of something else that's gone on here.
Thank you.
Cass Pauley. Cass,
yeah. I've unmuted.
Yeah. Do you want me to just try and address the question, or do you want to say anything about it?
No, I'd like you to address the question. Yeah, about
the
delivery for people coming in and out.
You've written, are you saying that the following can now register their cars: adult children or friends helping those who are elderly or disabled as unpaid carers, those coming to help a resident who is a blue badge holder, not the person coming to the street to visit or help them?
Because children. I asked that because on the original letter it said if you're a blue badge holder, you can come in to visit someone, but that might not be the issue. The resident might be the blue badge holder and someone is coming to help them. It could be a friend, it could be an adult child. It's not necessarily a paid carer. We've got people who are in their 80s who are struggling and who need people to come in and out to them, who aren't necessarily official carers. And they are the very people who won't be able to fanny around filling in extra forms and so on. So you need to address this issue. The other one is what about grandparents, where your daughter-in-law is dropping off her kids for you to charge one. We've got people who do that on these streets, and those people need to be able to just come in.
So look, part of the answer here is that it's impossible for this council to come up with an exhaustive list of every possible permutation of reasonable need. We've tried to kind of capture what I describe as the major food groups here, so that people understand the type of thing we're really asking people to register for. It's my view, and I think the officers can agree or dissent, but it's my view that what we're really looking to try and get to is a system that is suitably responsive. That if you tell us as residents, I'm asking you to be custodians of the system. If this set of roads gets full of traffic, it's going to fundamentally have undermined the purpose of the scheme. But if you tell us as residents with good cause that you have a need for a dispensation for a given vehicle for some of the permutations that you just set out, I think this council wants to adopt an approach that allows that to happen. In a sense, I want to be slightly kind of use agnostic. I'm kind of asking you as residents to kind of show reasonableness in what it is that you need to permit, and this council will try and take a permissive approach through our listing system going forward to enable that to happen. But as I say, we need to avoid the system becoming overwhelmed unnecessarily with whitelist vehicles that could undermine the system. So we're asking you to be the managers of the reasonableness of those requests.
So without knowing what the parameters would be for applying for somebody, you might have 3 adult children, 4 adult children. You might be at a stage in life where you need them to be able to come sometimes. And this is quite a big period of time when they might be coming from a distance. They can't pinpoint their arrival.
But my question that I'd ask to every resident would be this in general terms. If you say to us as a council, I need to register all 4 of those grandchildren or children because they're coming so frequently that they're very likely to come often, my view would be fine. We'll find a way to register them.
Right.
But what I do ask you to do is to ask yourself the question: is that really realistic and reasonable? And for example, let's not just register everyone who could possibly visit us within these potential relatively small windows of coverage on the off chance they may. But if obviously you've got regular usage that from historical experience suggests that they are likely to need to, then that would be a good reason. If this is going to be like a once...
Yeah, sorry. If that flexibility, it's just that without knowing what the guidelines are, and if you're the 88-year-old, you'll be the very person who finds that all difficult to deal with. I am not speaking about myself. I am thinking as a community
I understand that.
Of neighbours who've lived here for many years.
Yeah, and what I'm trying to say is that what we're trying to do, beyond the question, which I'd like to hear some views on in a minute about the extent of the boundary, is what I'd like us to evolve to is to having 2 tiers of dispensation. The one that we've already got in place, which is for on the day in effect, and one that enables regular visitors to also have a dispensation with good cause. And so I think what we're considering is a form similar to the one that you've had for your exemption of your own vehicles, where instead of showing us evidence of your ownership of the vehicle or the registration of the vehicle, will instead give us some argument or evidence about why the vehicle concerned is a regular visitor to your residence and therefore needs long-term, say, annual dispensation. And so that would be the plan. We would have a longer-term dispensation system along with on the day. So I guess if the once in the blue moon visit occurs, you can do it on the day. But if you really, really have regular cause for a visitor to come, then there's this other more long-term dispensation system available too.
If you're at a stage of life where that is likely to happen, or a member of your household has particular difficulties, then I think that would be reasonable. It's just a little bit vague, isn't it? It depends. The proof it is, and how you're going to judge. Yeah,
the reason for being vague is this: I don't really want us to exercise undue judgment. I want us to trust residents.
Yes.
To present us only with that which is necessary, and provided that happens, we shouldn't have any reasons to decline anything.
That sounds.
And yeah,
can I answer
provided
that's the shopping question, and if I could just hog you for one more moment. This business of the 3 hours, when you look at, for example, Tesco, this is my big thing, that you've got 4-hour booking slots. So you can't book it between 8 and 12, you can't book it between 9 and 1, and so on. There's a knock-on to those time slots. Why can't you let us have Tesco's and Waitrose and so on? We are not a rat run. It's not the case. If you look at our streets in the school holidays, we're as quiet as the grave around here. The traffic is the school.
Well, rat running traffic, it can be people going to the school or to other schools. So I would simply say that by saying there's much lower traffic outside school times doesn't mean that it's necessarily a direct correlation between only the visitors to the school, but it's also people in cars going to St James's and St Catherine's and all sorts of other schools that are in and around. So there is a rat run if you look at the figures.
You only chose Catholic schools there. That's quite interesting.
Well, I happen to. Well, forgive me. I happen to have picked two of the first school names that came to mind. I don't think it's a relevant consideration that I picked St Mary's or somebody else. It really doesn't. It really isn't the key point. The factor I'm pointing out is that there is.
It is quiet in school holidays, and
yeah, sure, and it will be. But let me just finish that point. During school holidays, there will be no school street restrictions. So there won't be any restrictions outside the times where there are these traffic volumes. These only operate during school.
My point is that we were told about rat running, and I think other people may disagree, but I have never found in 35 years of living here that this is particularly a rat run. Our traffic has come.
Okay. Well, the last thing I'd say about that is this is obviously a conversation of Clifton and Copthall Gardens residents, given the specific impact of the scheme on them. There are, of course, roads that are part of the wider school street network around Richard Reynolds, who probably more directly face the consequences of the rat running, but where your inclusion within this scheme is integral to maintaining a working school street. So you're helping people who live on, say, Lion Road, as much as you're potentially helping yourselves. On the point about shopping, the approach is broadly this, as it is with the other on-day dispensations. The challenge we have around deliveries, whether they're grocery deliveries or others, is that the obligation has to relating to the school street has to rest with the driver. The driver of a vehicle is responsible for the legality of their driving behavior. So if they drive into an area that is prohibited, they or their employer, if they're working in a business capacity, are obviously the recipient of the given fine. So what we're saying through our dispensation system is that you can notify a supplier, whether it's Asda or Amazon or whatever, that they can access the school street during the hours of operation, subject to them provide either registering themselves on the website that you provide them with, or that you're willing to do so, provided they provide you with the relevant registration. And that's one of the points we're going to have to see how that plays out. The difficulty we have here is there is no clear alternative to this model, because we cannot place a sort of blanket exemption on vans or on liveried vans, to the points I've made. So basically, it's going to require a relationship between the resident and the supplier to ensure that the vehicle or the vehicle's business is not fined. Now, it may be there are going to be behaviours we're going to have to see how they play out. We're not the only school street in London, let alone in the borough. So suppliers of these services are having to get used to these types of measures all over the country. And it may be they adjust their delivery patterns to come outside the hours of operation. It may be that they park outside the zone and hand deliver within it. It may be that they come into the zone and get fined and just tolerate that as a thing, as a business cost. It may be they come into the zone and they do the exemption. It may be, I suspect, a mix of all of the above, but we will have to see.
Thank you.
Stephen Adamson had a question.
Yes, thanks, Councillor. I've got questions based on the presentation that your colleague started with. And if you'll bear with me, there's kind of 3 questions. First of all, was glad to see the increase in the criteria for exemptions, because that should help things. You presented data on the reduction in traffic over a period of time. And question one would be, how do you know that that reduction of traffic is not related to COVID lockdown as opposed to a school street scheme?
Well, let's address that first. Let's address that first. So my understanding, Lindy, David, could you confirm, is that these are during COVID pre-readings and during COVID post-readings. So they're not historic pre-COVID readings of traffic volumes. Is that right, David stroke Lindy?
Yeah, yes, the baselines were undertaken just before the school streets were implemented, so a couple of weeks before, yeah.
Okay, so taking that data at face value, you also offered or proposed that there is an option to move the positioning of the ANPR cameras to closer to the school. And I guess I've got two questions on that. How do you draw a conclusion based on the diversity of opinions that you've got represented on this call about whether you move the ANPR cameras or not? And when will that decision be made? And on what basis will your trial period through to the end of June be based? Will it be the current scheme with the current positioning of the ANPR cameras, or will you be giving us an option to move the ANPR cameras prior to the end of June so we can see how the revised proposal would work?
So let me take your second question first, as it were. I mean, they're interwoven. The answer is, at the last community conversation of this type we asked this question about where the desire for the perimeter was that related to these two roads. There was no dissent on that call against the perimeter that we've proposed. And so we took it as read that was what residents of these roads would like us to have gone on the basis of a trial with. Having read the correspondence that's ensued as we got closer to that, it feels to me that part of the solution, if there are particular anxieties about the arrangements, is to enable a kind of two parts to the road system here where vehicles can access, but are still effectively discouraged from doing so. And I think we haven't heard any, including yourself, we haven't heard a view on any of that from any residents yet. But what I will be turning to shortly is trying to gauge a view on what is the preferred option. Now, depending on what I think the tenor of the conversation is here, we'll obviously as a council reflect on how we take this forward. These are done under experimental measures, and so we can adjust. But ultimately, in the first instance, I'm using this meeting as an important litmus test of how we proceed. If the view was tonight, as unanimously as it was at the last meeting in favour of, say, moving them back, I think our view is that we would seek to move them back before we operate the scheme.
Okay, and I think that's fair comment. And I think a lot of the concerns that you've heard expressed have been around the use of the NPR and the associated privacy issues and all the rest of it. So that does give us an option. But I'll be quiet now and let you have that debate.
No, thank you. Yeah. No, thank you, Trevor. I had a question from you, and in a minute I will sort of try and move us on to having a bit more of a discussion about the actual extent of the zone. But Trevor.
Yes, you've partly answered it. I mean, my concern is really about the catchment area of the school and what the school's position is. We've heard a lot about the pressures being put on residents. We've had very, very little, in fact, nothing from the school about what they're prepared to do. If this is a school problem, shouldn't they be taking the lead on this? Not the council, and certainly not residents. This is presented. Okay. This is presented as an air quality issue. It's not a road safety issue. There have been no accidents of children in the roads that we're talking about. And if you wanted to do something for road safety or air quality, why not close Heath Road instead?
Because it's a major arterial road that is constructed for that purpose. But anyway, I mean, my response to you would be, I do disagree with part of your narrative there. I think it absolutely is for road safety. It's about improving the road environment for users. So part of the challenge is that the road network around the school, and I can say this from personal experience in this instance, I cycled through it quite frequently. Prior to this scheme, it's horrendous. It's a really hostile, congested, badly behaved driving environment that it does not encourage people to walk or to cycle. And so in air quality terms, yes, there's a benefit. In road safety terms, I believe there will be a benefit. I also believe its perception benefit in road safety terms is very important, because what that does is that enables people to come in walking and cycling in a way that they wouldn't choose to otherwise. And of course, noise, air pollution and so on from the reduced volumes of traffic that were cited in the report are all relevant. To your earlier point, Trevor, forgive me, where you started, can you state that again? Where was the beginning of your question?
Yes, I was asking about the catchment area of the school.
The catchment,
no, I've heard what you've said about that, and surely this is an issue. So
it's not a matter for the council.
The school is responsible for its catchment area. Just a second.
I'm sorry. I'm not going here. I'm not going here.
No,
I'm
really
I want to
not.
Say. No. We're not talking about the catchment. We're not talking about the catchment area, though. Okay.
Let me talk about travel plan. Right. We had to drag a travel plan out of the school. They wouldn't publish a travel plan, yet they had this large area where people were driving into the school. They come in from Barnes and Hampton and so on. How many actual accidents have there been in the streets that that are included in the scheme? How many accidents have there been? I know
not the material question. That's not the material question, Trevor. No, it's not. Forgive me. Let me answer your question. Whether you don't like the answer is entirely for you. But my answer is nonetheless this. We have an obligation as a council to make sure that the spaces around our schools are conducive for active travel, that they are as safe as they can be, that they don't have adverse air quality, poor parking, and behaviours that frankly are dangerous. This school street scheme with barriers has demonstrated the important reduction in traffic through the roads concerned, for the betterment of residents and for pupils at the school. I'm not going to comment on catchments of schools that aren't in the council's control. I didn't authorise the school to be there, to expand there, and I'm not responsible for its admissions policy. I have to deal with the reality of the fact that as a school which has faith criteria, it does have a different catchment area from a standard state school based purely on distance. And that's one of the reasons that we have to work harder as a council, not push the buck and say, it's the school's problem. There are roads. There are roads as a council. We have a responsibility to make sure they're as safe and unpolluted and supportive of active travel as they possibly can be. And it'd be an abdication of my responsibility as an elected representative to say, that's on the school. I don't believe it is. The school have worked cooperatively with us. I think it's fair to say that the school don't see this as their scheme. They haven't pushed it, but then neither have many of the other schools with school streets on them around the borough. This council has a policy of supporting school streets for the various benefits that it delivers. The school as an institution is happy with us proceeding with that policy. And I think a school is more than just its institutional leadership. Importantly, as part of this exercise, we will be surveying the views of parents and pupils. And I have to say, pupils, my instinct is pupils will overwhelmingly support this. We do have a responsibility to our young people in this borough to make sure that the environment around their schools is the best, is the safest, is the cleanest that it possibly can be. And I don't buck from that at all. That's my responsibility. We can take different views on that, but that certainly is my position.
Wholly disagree.
Well, that's fine. As I said, Mr. Trevor, you had your question. I gave you my answer. We might disagree. I'm not going to please everybody all of the time. I've got the Austins.
I'm waiting for them.
Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. So I wrote a letter to the council on the 7th of March, or sent it by email, and I raised some very specific questions therein, which this meeting hasn't yet addressed. but it directly addressed, that is. At the outset, Lindy said that the cameras were positioned at the gateways to the school street zones. Well, at this end of Clifton Road, the Heath Road end, they've been set back. So you have the school starting from Heath Road, Clifton Road corner, all the way up. But you have the cameras outside, starting about 100, no, not 100 yards, 50 yards further up the road. So you can have people parked legitimately in the road in school street time hours, wishing to move their cars. They move up the road, they're going to go through a camera and get a ticket. What is the penalty? What traffic violation have they incurred by going through that traffic camera? Going into an AMPR zone or going into a school street zone?
Well, I'll ask the officers to comment on the specific detail, but the reason for the setback there is because, as I understand it, there's a slip road at the rear, which serves a number of the businesses, I think it is there. And that's...
And you're saying...
Forgive me, sorry.
You wanted to exempt them, and the letter I got back saying they don't have to register. They could register, but they don't have to register, provided they turn left out of the car park onto Clifton Road and onto Keith Road. So you're limiting their use of the exits.
I think my understanding is, and officers can comment on after this, my understanding is there is advanced warning signage making clear that they're entering a school street with restrictions on vehicle movements. That's a legally enforceable sign, which means that vehicles that have not received explicit exemptions or dispensations are not permitted. As a driver, if you drive into that, it's a legally enforceable piece of signage. And the fact we're using AMPR is the form of enforcement. It's not of itself, that's relatively inconsequential here in the context of your question. The point is that school street is, let me finish the point. A school street with the hours of restriction is a legally enforceable restriction on vehicle movements.
Thank you. But I said,
David?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
Fine, but you can be parked on a residence bay outside number 2 Clifton Road, and to proceed north, you're going to go through a traffic zone. You're going to go through the traffic camera. You're already in the school street zone. You're legitimately in the school street zone. You've been there overnight, and you're going to go through the camera.
Yeah. Yeah, so just to clarify,
impose a penalty for that. You've just
forgive me. Let me just check. Can we bring David Tidley in? You've asked a question. David wants to respond.
Yes, I mean, if you are already within the school street zone, you are able to leave it, including passing a camera point. Now, we're trying to make sure that the signage and the camera locations are suitable in order to enable some of these dynamics to work on the boundaries. I mean, ultimately, in that sort of situation, if a ticket was issued, it could, of course, potentially be contested if we are shown to have been issuing any in error on some of those in some of those circumstances. But we're trying to ensure that the scheme works correctly. And until the scheme starts and we start, as we say, we would have a couple of weeks of issuing warning notices and seeing how that goes and whether or not any notices are being issued to the wrong places and the wrong vehicles, and we will then take that information and help feed it to refine how the cameras and the signs talk to each other and work.
Thank you, David.
For me to appeal against that, I'm going to have to prove that I was already parked on the road before the restricted hours come in.
No, I think we're not going to, on this call, going to be able to resolve detailed points of enforcement. You know, if you want to follow that up with us, very happy to explore that. But I think for the benefit of everyone else, we just want to get through a few more questions.
Why haven't you already responded to my letter of the 7th of March?
I'll tell you why. You asked me another question. I'll tell you why. Because this meeting was coming up. It felt to me appropriate to hear the range of views from people other than yourselves before we formed a view on these matters, and then we'd be in a position to respond.
Okay, thank you.
So next, Lisa West.
I had a question, showing Lisa's computer, about accountability.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
It seems that you're not prepared to be accountable for previous decisions of councillors with regarding setting up or allowing the school to set up in the first instance.
If we're going there with this question, I'm really not taking it, because this is not material. I can't influence the past. I don't have a time.
I have a solution by way of preventing mission creep by allowing the residents to form a contract with you, such that we don't have exemptions withdrawn or increased fines or suffer mission creep on the currently, which seem to me quite reasonable basis that it's been set out.
Look, I'm happy to explore that, though. I have to say to you, no previous administration can mandate a future one. That is kind of the requirement of a kind of vibrant democracy. Is any elected set of representatives can undo or change the policy position of a previous set. So I think any such contract would be unlikely to have a binding requirement on it, to be perfectly frank. But yeah, I'm happy to explore it, because I can tell you in principle, I've no reason whatsoever for me, or I can't see any good reason why any successor of me with whatever political party would seek to reduce those requirements, because frankly, it's for your benefit. I honestly don't see the anxiety. And of course, ultimately, the penalty that you can pay them is by not voting for them at the next election. Ross Edwards, or Rose Edwards, forgive me, I'm not Ross, I can't quite see, my eyesight is not what it used to be. Ross, I think, Rose Edwards. No?
I've asked
Okay.
to unmute.
I think, okay.
Thank you for unmuting me. I just want to point out, I'm making more of a statement than a question here, because I truly believe every question is going to be answered tonight. And I actually don't think this is the right way to sort out this problem with this community. So really what I want to say is that as custodians of this scheme, which you kindly pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, we have a choice. And the choice is that we do not want cameras around our roads. So the solution to all of this is, please find another solution that does not involve...
There isn't. I'm afraid there isn't one. The choice before us is this: if we seek to want to maintain the reductions in through traffic and associated school traffic within these roads, there simply is a binary choice between a sustainable ANPR system and not having any system. We cannot sustain a system of paid for operatives on the barriers, and there has been no appetite shown by residents and the school community for policing the system themselves. So unless the latter were to emerge as a realistic possibility that was sustainable, there is no other option than ANPR to enable the reductions in through traffic volumes that we've delivered.
Well, then in that case, it really is up to you to make this system work for us and not to work against us.
Yes, and that is the endeavour.
Because it is working against us. Everybody is very unhappy about the amount of paperwork, administration, timekeeping, worry we have to deal with if this system is implemented. It just doesn't work for us. So
let me say a little something about that.
The traffic. We don't mind having cameras on Heath Road, on the main roads, but when it impacts on us, it's affecting us. And you've got to find another way. Barriers, but of course, a barrier at the end of Station Road.
But of course, the traffic was impacting you as residents too. So my honest response to this, and I've said this to residents in written correspondence and telephone calls and so on throughout this process, is there is not, to steal the words of another politician of perhaps higher acclaim than me, there isn't a frictionless answer here. It simply isn't. It isn't possible to deliver a admin-free solution to to a reduction of the traffic that we're talking about within your roads. Is it possible to reduce with real heart and endeavour a minimal amount of disruption and paperwork for residents? Yes, it is. And I think as a council, we're committed to that. We do our very best to, on day one, make sure we've got the best offering we can, but also look to improve it over time too.
With all due respect, this system really depends on people being tech savvy. This road exists as a strong community. There are people on this community who've lived here for well over 40 years who now want to comfortably retire and enjoy their lifestyle on this road. And what you are enforcing, and actually when I'm saying enforcing because this does seem like we have no choice. You are enforcing
you have a choice.
No, you're not, because you have the influence to have this system not impact on us.
No, forgive me. As we said at the beginning of this presentation, there is on offer here at least one option, which is for taking half of the road system we're talking about here completely out of ANPR operation. No restrictions available on it at all.
Right. Yeah. So my suggestion is, why can't you have a combination of this that does not impact on us? So, for example,
I think that has been offered.
Clearer signs at the front of Clifton Road and Copthall Gardens saying no entry to school or Station Road during these times, because may I point out that the signage at the moment is very small. If you blink and you'd miss it. So
it's the correct legal signage. It's the correct legal signage. We are required to display the appropriate legal and statutory signage. We can't alter it.
Okay, councillor, but what I'm saying is, why can you not have a combination of system that does not impact on us? For example,
my answer to that,
at Clifton Road and Copthall Gardens, and a physical barrier at the end of Copthall Gardens on Station Road, so that drivers know on entering either point that they have no access. A physical barrier at Station Road, no entry from the high street, and then your ANPCR, or whatever the hell you want to call it, can catch offenders who maybe 3 strikes and they're out, enter. But that way,
physical barriers, I imagine, would be something that many residents would not be very supportive of. They would cause actual physical restrictions on resident movements. No, but they would still cause resident restrictions on Station Road, which presently don't exist under the ANPR system. I mean, one of the advantages of the ANPR system is that you, as residents living within that core area of ANPR operation, you are free to use any of the exit points of the ANPR system.
No, I understand. I understand. It's the way we live our lives. It's the elder residents on this road who rely on their friends popping in at any time and not having to worry about having a fine. It's about people who have building work here, which I'm sure on your you've seen many people do, who have multiple people coming to do up their houses, who then have the added hell of different vehicles by different tradespeople coming to their road and getting into a pickle on that. You've got. But
if you'll forgive me on this, I mean, if you'll forgive me, please allow me to answer the. There are requirements on an awful lot of those things as they presently exist, associated with controlled parking zones, and so and I'm sure they were seen as horrendous impositions when controlled parking zones were originally introduced. But many residents are now highly supportive of them. Indeed, one of the challenges we have as a borough is managing the many requests for areas that are not covered by them that want them. So I would say, look, there's a balance to be struck. Allow me to finish. Allow me to finish. On your point about sort of elderly population and so on, the fact is that many of the services that we're talking about are now accessed almost solely online anyway. Your Asda delivery, your Sainsbury's delivery, your Ocado delivery, your Uber, your Amazon delivery. And the idea that residents are technologically savvy enough to be able to place these orders and request these services, but that a one form dispensation using the same internet technology is sort of totally technologically beyond them, I don't accept. I can accept that there is an administrative challenge.
This is my point. My point is there isn't one shoe that fits all. You know, there are people who are tech savvy who probably think, yeah, great, I don't mind filling out forms, I've got time to do it. There are other people who are elderly who probably have never even gone online on this road.
But as I've just said, in answer to your question,
there isn't one.
There are. Forgive me. There is an option on the table here, which I think I'd like to now move to hearing some more views about, of reducing the extent of the zone, such that the very visits that we're talking about wouldn't even require a dispensation system, because in effect, for an extent of the roads that we're talking about here, there would only be a signage only system, and the ANPR would only kick in with signage further in beyond the horseshoe. And that would mean that your deliveries and so on, your visitors could come to the part of the road that was in effect not covered by ANPR. That is a solution that we are as a council and have been open to, but until now has not been one that we felt had resident support. So perhaps, on that, if I could take wider views, I've got John Parfitt. I just want to say, you asked a question about long periods of time for the closures. I just want to say a brief thing on this because I have responded to some residents on this. The hours of operation of ANPR that we're launching with are because of the extended drop-off and pickup times required by the school because of COVID. They're staggering, obviously, drop-off and pickup times far more than they would in inverted commas normal times. As now the vaccination program gathers momentum, hopefully we get to turn our backs on this dark period in our lives, and hopefully schools will be able to normalize over time. So we would expect the ANPR hours of operation to shrink to reflect the drop-off and pickup times shrinking and dropping too. So one of the benefits over time we see of this ANPR system is that it won't be as exhaustively covering in times as it presently is. Do you want to say anything to that, John? No, I haven't heard anything. So what I'm going to do now is there are lots and lots of comments and questions. I haven't been able to get through them all, and I'm conscious that we're meant to finish within 15 minutes. So I think one of the things that I'd welcome now is there anybody from Duncan was the last posting that I've got here. If anybody has specific reflections on the options about the zone's extent, if you could now just put question. I can see George waving physically, but if others could put question down beyond Duncan's, if you want, or point you want to make about the extent of the zone. George, could we GPW? I think he's listed as. Could we unmute?
Thanks very much, Councillor. And just on your point about moving the conversation on to what life would be like if you moved the ANPR cameras up to the horseshoe, can you give us a little bit more detail of what that would look like, what that would feel like, specifically where that would go? And it strikes me that if that was around about the school, then there would be nothing to stop parents or others coming into certainly Clifton Road and driving all the way up Clifton Road, dropping off and turning back round, and then potentially making Clifton Road quite a serious rat run in of itself. Or have I got that wrong?
So yeah, no, so that, yeah, so I mean, officers may be able to put up the slide relevant to this, but I think the important thing to say here is, yes, that was the anxiety that I had expressed at the last community conversation, which seemed to me the rationale for the uniform view that the perimeter should be at the entrance points from Heath Road. I suppose what I would say to counter that, and I'm not saying I rule out that risk, it exists, is that, of course, there is a precedent. We have got the various feeder roads to Station Road, such as Laurel and Lion, that have had barriered systems. they haven't had barrier systems. They've had people on them advising against coming into the system to then find barriers further within that have, formally speaking, still been permeable, so you could still come into them. And when we put signage and attendance there, the immediate aftermath of the initial few days of people coming in, hoping that the signage, or being oblivious to the signage, or hoping that the signage didn't mean anything, changed, and people just didn't come in any longer. So it's settled. And I think there would be a consistency in approach, because we plan on signing only those roads as school streets, but the ANPR elements being where the barriers are, depending on what we decide about Clifton and Copthall. So I don't think by any means that having signage only off of Heath Road would be an invitation to all, but it's clear that over time some people may well become wise to what the availability and may seek to use it. The pro, I suppose, is that what it means for your Amazon delivery or for your spontaneous visitor is they have access to that horseshoe for coming in, picking up, dropping off, parking, and that obviously would reduce the need for dispensations for residents, because that would probably take a number of these deliveries and visits close enough to allow for hand carting or carrying to doorsteps or whatever. So those are the headline pros and cons that I see with it. Ultimately, it's a resident view that we're seeking to get about what you'd prefer to do. And look, it would be on a trial basis. So if the one variation that there was a view you wanted us to try proved to have more of the difficulties than the positivities, then there's always the opportunity to change that. But just in light of the comments that we received recently, it just feels important that we again restate the options there for this exclusion of parts of the road system, which would mean that some of the most frequently cited concerns would fairly significantly be addressed.
Can I add to that, Councillor, very quickly?
Yeah, sure, David.
Just to add, I mean, there would be two things that we would also try and do at the same time. If the Clifton and Copthall was signed only at the south end and the camera was only at the sort of single section of road, we would obviously still work with the school to try and ensure through their school travel plan that they weren't just driving as far up to the school as possible. And the second thing is that option would still prevent the through traffic, because you would still be unable to just drive through the area to get to Twickenham, because obviously you would be going through the camera option. So there would still be some benefit from that option.
Of course, the other negative would be we haven't been working on the assumption of excluding these parts of the road, we'd have to resolve whether or not we still allowed access for residents in the non-ANPR covered elements of these roads through the ANPR system, because that is not how we anticipate treating Lyon and Laurel and Sherland, who are on a signage only school street system. We're not giving them whitelist opportunity to be able to go through the ANPR system. So I think the starting assumption would have to be that the excluded area, the signage only area, wouldn't have the ability to come into the ANPR area, which would be another drawback.
Yeah, I think
it could be done.
It could be done. I think the concern for a lot of people would be, you win by not having ANPR, but you lose because you become quite an attractive place, despite what you say, for school parents to come in and say, it's fine, we can come in here, turn around, and nothing we can do. And then you get that problem, which a number of people have alluded to on this call, I think, in messages, which says we don't want people just parking up over our driveways as we're trying to get out in the morning or in the evening. So that, I guess, that's the balance to strike.
Yeah, and look, I hear all those points, but at the end of the day, I'm sat in the chair of having to, with my fellow committee members and officers, having to make a decision here, and there is no, I can tell you from unpleasant experience, as it were, that there is no decision that is everyone's a winner. These are tough judgment calls, and in a way, that's why I want to be very strongly influenced by what I hear tonight and beyond. I got Penny Sowden next.
Hi. I just want to say that I think people are being excessively negative about the use of the cameras. We found the scheme very good. I think it's improved air quality. I think it's improved safety. We're very, very strongly against the movement of the cameras. I think it would basically be a license for all the parents to say, okay, the only way we can access dropping our kids off at school would be going from Heath Road into Copthall Gardens, going up to the top of the school, dropping their kids and going down Clifton Road and out that way. And it would actually increase the traffic versus where we started from in the first place. And I just think, and I can't see the advantage of having a school street scheme at all if you're going to still leave, you know, a one arm of the school still exposed to traffic. It just seems completely illogical to me that the whole side of the school, the south side of the school, would still have cars, going round in a loop. I mean, why bother to have the scheme at all?
Well, I hear the point, and I think it's got a lot of validity. But I think to try and play devil's advocate with it, and I'm not necessarily saying I share the view, but you do with the school street system in operation on the remaining roads, you do actually safeguard the perimeter, frankly, the majority, if not all, of the perimeter of the school. But I take your.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree, because the vast majority of the children are actually coming up from being dropped off in the buses on Heath Road. And so if you have increased traffic in Copthall and Clifton, those kids just stream up this road, and you're risking
No, I mean, I hear that.
them being run over.
I hear that. I think that is the downside here.
And also all the business about the, carbon monoxide and everything else, and the nitrogen, everything, you're increasing the traffic around the top of that loop, which is right next to a school with, children who are out playing, young kids. We're trying to improve the air quality. How can you in it within the school? And I totally would disagree with having a horseshoe.
Well, it seems from what I'm seeing here so far, is a lot of views against changing the perimeter. Perhaps if a few people have got hands up, if they could take them down, because I'm not using that as a means of bringing people in at this stage. But perhaps if I could just then, once those hands are down, if I could just ask people to put up their hands if they actually think moving the perimeter back, as envisaged, to create a horseshoe that's signage only would be a beneficial outcome. See 2 or 3 hands here. For very, very few hands, it has to be said. Just by way of the flip side then. So given these two choices, those that would prefer to maintain the existing perimeter, recognizing, of course, that we want to provide more dispensations and flexibilities wherever possible to make life as easy as it can be. Okay. Yeah, quite. I mean, it's more. It's quite sizably more. Would anybody who hasn't? I'm conscious we've only really got a few moments. Would anybody? Let me go back to the chat. I'm just going to go back to the chat. What I'm going to do, actually, if it's all right, is I'm just going to allow one of the ward councillors from both sides to very briefly summarise any views they've heard, and then we'll try and wrap up, actually, because I think what we'll do for I'm conscious we have not been able to address everybody's questions and concerns. As many of you know, my inbox is available, as are officers, as are your ward councillors. I think we'll have to reflect. But Katie, have you got anything you briefly want to say?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, as a representative of South Twickenham, which does include some of the questions that there have been on places like Laurel Avenue and their feedback on it, I have to say some of the feedback from Lion Road and Laurel has been really positive. They are the roads that predominantly have seen this as a rat run, because people turn off Heath Road and up those roads and cut down through the school. So anything that we're trying to do, one of the things that we want to make sure is that we don't create a problem somewhere else. They might be okay, and we don't create a problem on Clifton and Copthall and further to the east. So I think that it's been really good to listen to some of this debate, because we don't want to create a problem that you haven't had. And I think that the options that are on the table do prevent us from doing that. So I think that that's one part that's really important. The second thing I did want to say is there's been a lot of debate about the school and some of the stuff around whether the school are doing anything. From what I've seen, the school are doing as much as any other school in the borough. I think it's really important that whatever our feelings towards the school, these are our local children. These are the children who are growing up in our local environment, both children going to that school and people who use this area as a walking route through to St Mary's. And I've walked through on many mornings in the area, and I've seen the difference in the footfall of people walking and people cycling in the area. And I think it's really positive. I think it's something that's good for active travel for children and their health going forward. And I think it's really important in terms of the air quality of what they're breathing in. So to me, I think that the school street is important. We can be as flexible as possible to make it as positive an experience for everyone around there. But they are the children of our borough, and it's important that we do the right thing by them. We have that sort of responsibility.
Thank you, Katie. James Chard, on behalf of the other bit, as it were, of this road network, do you want to say anything?
Well, I'd echo a lot of what Katie has said about this. Obviously, the geography that Michael explained earlier, the roads that have the inconvenience are more disproportionately on the Twickenham Riverside end, and I do appreciate that there are inconveniences associated with registering vehicles that are visiting Copthall Gardens and Clifton Road. However, there does seem to be an appreciation, at least, that the school street does bring benefits in terms of air quality and in terms of traffic volumes. There's some people who obviously believe that it should be taken out entirely, but I'm not getting the impression that that's the majority view. The view that I am getting is that it should be made as easy as possible for residents to use the registration system, limiting the paperwork as far as possible, making it as easy as possible for people who may have more difficulties with digital access and so on. And I'm not hearing any support for the more limited horseshoe, which I entirely agree with, because I think it would generate a problem in terms of school traffic being funneled up Clifton and down Copthall, and increasing the problem rather than reducing it, particularly given what Penny was saying quite correctly, that a lot of these young kids who are walking into school walk in from Heath Road. So the air quality benefits and the traffic benefits are all the way up Clifton and Copthall.
So thank you, James. So look, I'm conscious that you haven't all had the opportunity to answer all of your questions. I don't think this concludes our engagement with you. We'll reflect about what next. Obviously, we've said we won't be doing anything until after the Easter holidays. We'll communicate with you in advance of that about what our intention is. But I think, as I said, I've got a good feel from this meeting, at the very least, as a starter, that I think there isn't a great desire to change the extent of the scheme. What I do hear loud and clear, and I do want to just make absolutely clear, I knew about it before this meeting, is a real strength of feeling that we as a council need to really go on a journey with you as residents to try and make sure that this process doesn't unduly inhibit your life. As I said, I can't promise there won't be some grit here, and I also can't promise that day one operation will be perfect. It won't. In fact, I almost guarantee it will not be, because there will be providers and services that won't have initially adjusted to this. But what I can say to you is you do have a council that genuinely, and councillors from your wards who are genuinely committed to trying to improve the scheme wherever possible, and then evaluate how you feel about it and about whether it can be sustained, changed, or whether it needs to be removed. But I think what I will just end with saying is, of course, what this council does have to do within this is think about your needs as the residents of Cliveden and Copthall, the wider roads that are part of this school road network in a different form that, as James and others have articulately put, have seen benefits from it, and also the young residents of this borough and further afield who are coming to and from the school. And, you know, I'm sure many of you think that if you're sat in my chair, you might make better decisions than me, and maybe you would. But unfortunately, I'm sat in this chair and I have to, with my colleagues, make these decisions, and those are the challenges we bear. I hope that through this evening's meeting, the previous meeting, and through my very sincere commitment to continue the dialogue, even where we may, on an individual basis, disagree, you know, I hope you can continue to stay with us on this journey about an endeavour that is genuinely intended in good faith to try and provide a better road system for you as the residents of it, as well as those other groups. And I really thank you for the time you've taken this evening, for all of the emails and correspondence you've given to me. I know not all of it is necessarily gushing with praise. Some of it is, some of it's not, but I do take it all in the same way it's intended, which is for you to try and inform the judgments of this council to make sure that the scheme is the best it possibly can be. So we're still available, still happy to talk. If further engagement of a form that you want is something, please come back to us. As I say, I don't think we're concluded here, but I've got a useful steer this evening for a direction of proceeding. And of course, as an experimental measure, it will be continually reviewed. And if there are problems, we'll either address or make significant amends. All right, well, thank you. And I think I better let you get back to your evenings. But I really appreciate the number of you that have attended, and thank you for the good and candid and friendly and decent way that you've presented your points. Thank you.